1 month and counting before Canada enters uncharted waters. Come October 17th, recreational marijuana will be legal across the country. This was one of the Liberals' signature campaign promises, but concerns remain about risks to health and safety. Is the government anticipating a smooth rollout? Joining me is Minister of Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction, Bill Blair. Hi, Minister Blair. Pleasure to have you back on.
It's good to be on. Vashi, how are you today?
I'm good. I want to get to all these questions about legalized marijuana, but first I have to ask you about the story that we just talked about, Leona. I'm sorry, I just lost her. Alislev. I'm sorry, Leona Alislev leaving your party, moving over to the Conservatives. Did it take you by surprise?
Well, it caught me by surprise, but I've worked very closely with Leona. I wish her all the best. I know it must have been a very difficult decision for her, and I hope she's well.
She says that she tried to raise her concerns, that she exhausted her options within the party, but she felt the only way she could criticize the party without retribution was to step away from it and actually make that move of walking away from government and moving to the opposition. What does that say about your party?
Well, I have to tell you, I'm a little bit surprised at that, because that has not been at all my experience. My experience in this government and with this party has been very collegial and collaborative. We talk often. We meet in National Caucus. I've never experienced any impediment in being able to express my opinion or position, and frankly, I've always felt that I've been treated very respectfully.
Okay, I want to move on to legalized marijuana, because we're only a month away from that happening. There is a lot of apprehension about what's going to happen, specifically at the border. Have you met with your American counterparts since assuming your new role to talk about that?
Well, there has been discussions between principally Minister Goodall and his counterparts in the United States. Vashi, I would simply point out, for the last 5 years, we've had a very well-regulated medical marijuana industry in this country, and the hundreds and literally thousands of people who've worked in that industry have not experienced difficulty at the border. I'd also point out that there are close to 4.5 million Canadians who identified that they've used marijuana, and yet literally hundreds of thousands of people cross that border without incident or impediment each and every day. And so, I think as long as people are smart about the way they approach the border, recognizing that the United States, as every sovereign country has, the ability to determine who can or come in, and if one presents oneself, reasonably, and frankly, if you show up at the border looking like Cheech and Chong, you're going into secondary. But I think for the overwhelming majority of Canadians, they won't experience a significant change in the way in which the border operates.
How do you define, though, what Cheech and Chong looks like, realistically? I mean, I know it's sort of a funny thing to say, but I think there are a lot of people who are apprehensive, who are either recreational users or who invest or who work for a cannabis company, for example. I mean, is your advice, is the formal advice of the government of Canada sincerely to not look like Cheech and Chong?
No, quite frankly, I think if one comes to the border looking like that one has recently used marijuana, or there's a strong smell of it in the car, one can expect that that'll draw the attention of the border security agencies. But I would simply point out the experience that we've had in the last 5 years in this country, where we've had a very large and active medical marijuana legalized regime, where we have literally thousands of Canadians working in that industry and have been for the last 5 years in a strictly regulated environment, and they have not experienced significant impediments at the border. And as well, we know that because they self-report, close to 4.5 million Canadians advise that they have used marijuana, and yet literally hundreds of thousands cross that border each and every day, and without incident or impediment. And so, I think based on that experience, I understand the apprehension. But I also have every expectation. The border agents on both sides of our border have a responsibility to keep our respective countries safe and to uphold our laws, and I don't anticipate a significant challenge. We will continue to work closely with our counterparts in the United States to make sure that they understand the concerns, the legitimate concerns of Canadians, but at the same time, I remain confident that the system will continue to function as it has in the past.
Do you really think, though, that the medical marijuana experience is parallel to what's about to happen in a month? I mean, you're talking about thousands of people working for companies. Take a look at what's happening on the stock market. There will be tens of thousands of Canadians impacted, whereas there might be a few, tens of thousands with medical marijuana, there could be 10 times that now. Do you you really think that those are completely parallel?
Yeah, and since 2013 in Canada, we've had a licensed medical marijuana production regime. It was implemented by the previous government, and that we have had a number of large Canadian companies that employ literally thousands of people in the licensed production of marijuana for medical purposes. We're now moving into another licensed regime for the production of cannabis for medical and non-medical, but the business activity is the same. The experience of those who have been in this industry for the past 5 years, I think, informs us and Canadians about what we might reasonably expect for people involved in that industry passing back and forth before the border. At the same time, we are engaged in discussions with our American counterparts. You know, they have a responsibility to uphold their laws as we do ours. We want to make sure that Canadians are aware that, for example, it's a serious criminal offense to take cannabis across the border into the United States or from the United States into Canada. And those laws will continue to be upheld and enforced. And we just want to make sure that Canadians know what their rights and their responsibilities are so that they may not inadvertently break the law.
The device that your government has approved for roadside tests, it's a saliva-based one, and Ottawa police say that they're not going to be using it. The police chief says he's concerned about the machine's cost and lack of accuracy. Why would you approve a device that police don't think will work?
Well, I don't know the basis of the Ottawa chief's concerns, but what I can tell you is that device was recommended to the government by the Canadian Society of Forensic Science, Drugs and Driving Committee. It was submitted to the National Research Council to conduct over 200 tests on its efficacy and effectiveness. Those were the standards that were put in place for the approval of this device. I'd also point out that this device and others have been in use in other jurisdictions for well over a decade. And I'd finally remind all the police leaders in the country that in 2013, they urged the government of the day to give them access to this technology because it was going to help them detect impaired driving by drugs and to keep our roadways safe. We listened to what they asked for. We did the research, we did the testing, we've approved a device, and we are providing the resources to assist them in acquiring that device. I appreciate the apprehension of a new technology, but this is precisely what the police have asked for in order to increase their capacity to detect, deter, and prosecute people who drive while impaired by drugs.
The machines are said to be climate sensitive. They're said to cost $6,000. Are you concerned that the results from those tests, given these concerns that have now been voiced by this police chief, might not hold up in court?
No, I'll tell you, it's important to understand what we're going to use these devices for, Vashi. These devices will enable the police to form reasonable and probable grounds to seek blood testing, to draw blood at a medical facility in order for it to be tested to determine the level of THC in the blood. These devices only give the police that indication, which provides reasonable probable grounds and does not in and of itself provide prima facie evidence of impairment. And so it's important.
But it leads to the ability to gather that type of evidence.
Well, it's an important advance that the police have been asking for, that has been in use for decades in other jurisdictions. 18 European countries, for example, Australia and New Zealand, have all been using these devices to excellent effect in their jurisdiction. The police in Canada asked for access to this technology. We didn't just go out and buy the first thing off the shelf. We put it through the rigorous tests based upon the recommendations and the standards that were established by the scientific body that has that responsibility for the government. We've approached this very carefully and cautiously. We've also said that we'll provide funding so that police services who may not be able to afford this device, you know, you mentioned that they're temperature sensitive. So are roadside alcohol screening devices that the police use in every jurisdiction across this country. And so we field tested these devices and similar devices across Canada in police jurisdictions so that we would know that they would work effectively in police conditions and in the cold weather.
So what does it say that this police chief doesn't want to use it?
Well, I think we also have a responsibility to make sure that the police chief has all the information he needs to be confident that this device can be used effectively. The police have asked us for the authority, for the technology, and for the training so that they can keep our roadways safe. We've listened to them, Vashi, and we've also made available the money they needed to train their people and the money they needed to acquire this equipment.
Okay.
We've given them access to what they said they needed and what we believe other jurisdictions have clearly demonstrated works.
All right, thanks, Minister. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time, though.
Thanks, Vashi.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye now.
So Canada, officially the second country in the world to legalize recreational marijuana. Canadians can carry up to 30 grams or about an ounce. Users must be at least 19 years old in most provinces. And the Associated Press reports What, Anne-Marie?
That Canada will pardon anyone previously convicted of a marijuana possession. That's huge. If the amount falls under the new legal limit, though, that's the key. So joining us now is the Canada Bureau Chief for the New York Times, Catherine Porter. So, Catherine, explain how this is going to work, because there's a federal law, but provinces also are sort of interpreting it a little bit differently. So give us a sense of how it's going to work in Canada.
Well, I think everyone's scratching their heads and confused about it because Canada's a big country. There's 13 different provinces and territories, and each one has taken its own take on what this will look like. So in some places, like where I am now, you can walk down the street and smoke marijuana in places that it's legal to smoke cigarettes. In other places, in other provinces, you have to do it only inside your private residence. That is, if you own your home, because many condo buildings and apartment buildings have banned marijuana smoking in their premises. So it's a patchwork right across the country, from where you can smoke it to where you can buy it. But generally, today is a day that if you could get your hands on legal marijuana, you should be able to smoke it someplace.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because I was up in Canada for Thanksgiving. It was Canadian Thanksgiving.
Oh, resident Canadian.
Yeah, and I was in Ontario, and, you know, Catherine, I was told there that though it's going to be legal on this date, only through mail order, that they wouldn't be opening any stores in Ontario, but I know in Newfoundland they were already lined up at midnight at stores over there. But I thought there were a lot of businesses trying to sort of establish their brand in Toronto, and so even though they couldn't sell anything, they were sort of giving away swag, like water bottles with their brand, trying to educate the public about what types of marijuana they sell, trying to sort of get into the public consciousness so that they're ready to go on day one.
And this is like big business, right? So the difference between legalization here in Canada and some of the states in the United States is that there are really strict regulations around marketing and advertising. So those companies that were giving out swag, if they were giving out swag to young people, they might have actually crossed the line of what is legal and what is permitted here. The whole idea of legalization here in Canada is basically to curb use among youth, particularly, and to stamp out the black market. It's not to make a ton of money. Although, you know, there are businesses that are jumping into this market that will be a huge, huge new market. And I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars. But the government has been really strict and saying that you cannot advertise to teens in any way. You can't have sports figures or anything that youth will think is cool on your advertising. So if you go into some of these stores, it looks really boring what you're buying. They look like sort of pharmaceutical packaging as opposed to anything with Snoop Dogg or something cool that you might see on it.
And I wonder how this looks to the men and women who are locked up for serving marijuana-related sentences. You know, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is being applauded for pardoning many people who have these records, but there are caveats for who will have their sentences reduced or wiped out. Tell us about that.
Well, that's all just unfolding right now while we're speaking. There's a press conference happening in Ottawa where they're laying out their plans. So we don't have all the details yet, but it seems that if you were convicted of possessing 30 grams or less, which is, you know, quite rare in recent times that you'd be convicted for that, although they do show statistically if you're black or indigenous, you had a greater chance of being convicted. But if you were convicted with this, you can go through a simple process and ask for a pardon, which would make your life a lot easier in terms of volunteering, getting jobs, travel. Whether it will mean you can travel to the United States has yet to be seen, because there's news stories here in Canada over the last couple of days that the U.S. Border Patrol has said that, you know, it does not recognize Canadian pardons.
Yeah, it's funny you would bring up border control, because that is one of the first things I thought about when, you know, it became clear that this was going to happen. I know as a Canadian that goes back and forth across the border, U.S. border control, they're pretty tough. I mean, these are a stern bunch of people, and now they have this added issue. I presume there's probably going to be sort of weed tourism with people sort of heading up and heading back down. Have border agents expressed any concern? What are they going to be looking for?
Well, there's certainly a lot of concern on this side of the border in Canada because, Canadians are the #1 tourists to the United States. People go back and forth across the border a lot. And there's a lot of concern about whether a lot of people have stock in these companies. So there's been huge concern that if you have stock in the company, will you be stopped at the border? Will you be asked if you have stock? There's been some clarification that perhaps that won't happen, although if you're a major investor, the Border Patrol now says, and you're going to a cannabis-related event in the United States, you'll be stopped. I mean, certainly there's big signs that are going up that say you cannot go across the border with pot. And so that's pretty clear, that you can't cross the border with pot because it's illegal federally in the United States. And I think most Canadians have their mitt on that. In terms of pot tourism, we'll see what happens. So far in this first year, there are no official lounges that are opening up. You can't go and smoke pot in a cafe like in Amsterdam. So I think it will be a little bit slow to start up in terms of real pot tourism, but there certainly are some towns that are banking on it. And already you're starting to see bed and breakfasts, these sort of pot-friendly B&Bs. A couple pot tour companies have started up, which can take you on a tour of a cannabis plant and take you to some lounges that do operate but aren't officially sanctioned. So we'll see what happens. No one really knows. I mean, it's all a big experiment, and I think many people, particularly people who smoke pot, are really excited by this.
And Catherine, what does your gut say? Even though this is happening in fits and starts and there are so many open questions, is this a point of no return? Do you expect that eventually this will all get kind of ironed out and there will be ways for recreational weed to be legal and everyone to be fine with it? Or do you get a sense that this could be reversed at some point?
The government is not backing down. There's been absolutely no sense. And to be honest, polls show that Canadians, by and large, are supportive of this. 70% think that pot should be legalized. There is some concern about what it will do for teenagers, and and it is illegal for teenagers. And some of the big selling points that the government said is that by legalizing it, they're trying to stamp out the black market, and then youth won't get it. But I think there's no turning back now. We're heading forward, and I would be completely gobsmacked if in the next election this was an issue.
All right, Catherine Porter, great to speak with you about this, and we'll let you get to that press conference to see what new information there is. It's still developing.
Thanks very much. Have a good day.
They're already in line here at the shop. Some of them have been here for hours waiting in the rain to become among the first Canadians to buy marijuana just for the fun of it. But this is not going to be a free-for-all today. Across Canada's 10 provinces and 3 territories, there are lots of rules and controls. Some people are saying that this rollout is as understated as the Canadians themselves.
The maple leaf is turning green. Starting today, Canada, our neighbor to the north, becomes one of 2 countries in the world to legalize marijuana for recreational use, fulfilling a campaign promise made by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
We will soon have a new system in place, one that keeps cannabis out of the hands of our kids and keeps profits away from organized crime.
Trudeau's government also expected to pardon Canadians convicted of simple marijuana possession. The details of who can indulge and where they can buy will vary from province to province, but it is legal coast to coast, unlike here in the U.S., where only 9 states, along with Washington, D.C., have legalized marijuana for recreational use. Medical marijuana is legal in 31 states, with 60% of Americans saying they support legalized marijuana.
It's very much an evolutionary process that's going to evolve over the next couple of years.
Back in Canada, lawmakers have been preparing for today's deadline for 2 years with public information campaigns.
Well, how do we talk about cannabis with our kids?
Canada's largest bank estimates that legal cannabis could add up to $8 billion to the economy. Polls show widespread support for the measure, which Parliament passed in June. Opposition politicians say it jeopardizes the health and safety of Canadians.
This really is about theatrics for the Prime Minister. It's about selfies. It's about fulfilling a promise to pot smokers.
Some fear that legal cannabis will increase the number of impaired drivers. In Ottawa, police will use a controversial new device that tests saliva for the drug. As for foreign visitors, it will remain illegal to bring cannabis across a Canadian border, no matter where you're going.
Don't bring it in, don't take it out. So, Steph, what does this mean for the United States? Are lawmakers here feeling the pressure at all?
Well, they will probably feel the pressure, Craig. Economists are comparing this to that time in the 1920s when there was prohibition in the U.S. and Canadian alcohol companies carved out their corners of their market like Seagram's. They still control it today. They think that possibly these Canadian marijuana manufacturers will have an opportunity to do the same thing. Back to you.
All right. Stephanie Goss there in Montreal. Steph, thanks.